You stand just inches from a 2,000-degree furnace for 12 hours straight, where the air is so thick with corrosive silica dust, it feels like breathing in liquid sandpaper. Your skin is permanently burned, your eyesight is clouded by glass-blowing cataracts, and you're only 24 years old. In 19th century England, entering a greenhouse was not just getting a job, it was signing your death warrant. While the Victorian elite sipped fine wine from delicate crystal, the men and children who shaped those masterpieces were working in a literal hellscape. We're not talking about a romanticized craft. We're talking about a high-stakes, high-speed production line where one wrong breath could collapse your lungs, and one slip of a molten parison could incinerate everyone within a 5-foot radius. But here's the mystery. Despite the grueling 12-hour shifts, the lethal heat, and the gaffers who ruled their workshops like absolute tyrants, this industry was the beating heart of the British Empire. Why did thousands of laborers, including children as young as 9, fight to work in these scorched pits? What was the secret hierarchy of the glass house that determined who lived and who was discarded? And how did these master craftsmen manipulate the laws of physics with nothing but their own breath and a few crude iron tools? Today, we are peeling back the soot and the shadows to reveal the brutal, high-octane reality of the Victorian glassblower. By the end of this, you'll realize that every piece of 19th century glass you see in a museum wasn't just blown, it was paid for in blood. Let's go inside the furnace. To understand the scale of this nightmare, you have to understand the city of Sheffield itself. By 1850, this wasn't just a town. It was a blackened, choking engine of industry, often called the abyss. The sun was a myth here, hidden behind a permanent shroud of smog, a word that hadn't been invented yet, but a reality that killed thousands. You walk toward the mill through streets slick with a mixture of horse manure, human waste, and coal soot that turns the mud into a thick, black paste. You aren't just going to work, you are entering a fortress of fire. Inside the mill, the first thing that hits you isn't the heat, it's the sound. It is a rhythmic, bone-shaking thud of steam hammers and the high-pitched shriek of metal being ground against stone. It is so loud that workers have to communicate through a series of frantic hand signals and guttural shouts. If you lose focus for even a second, you won't hear the warning shout of a coworker, and that's when the accidents happen. In this era, the crucible process is the gold standard for high-quality steel. But for the men involved, it's a death sentence. You are part of a team responsible for lifting clay pots filled with 60 pounds of liquid steel out of a white-hot furnace. There are no hydraulic cranes. There are no heat-shielded suits. You are wearing wool, thick, heavy wool, because cotton would ignite instantly in the radiant heat. To prevent your clothes from bursting into flames, you drench yourself in cold water before your shift. But within 10 minutes, the 130-degree ambient temperature has turned that water into scalding steam against your skin. Your eyes are constantly bloodshot, scorched by the ultraviolet glare of the molten metal. Over time, your vision begins to cloud. Glass blower's cataracts, they call it, but for you, it's just the slow crawl toward blindness. Your hands are a map of scar tissue, a history of every spark that found a gap in your rags. But the external burns are the least of your worries. Every breath you take is a gamble. The air is thick with silica dust from the grinding wheels and iron filings from the forge. In the medical journals of the time, they called the resulting cough grinder's asthma. In reality, your lungs are being micro-lacerated by millions of tiny shards of metal and stone. You'll start coughing up a gray, bloody phlegm by the time you're 25. By 30, your lungs will be so scarred and inelastic that you'll have to sleep sitting up just to keep from suffocating in your own fluids. And why do you do it? For a wage that barely covers a diet of bread, watered-down tea, and the occasional scrap of salted pork. You are trapped in a cycle of debt slavery, often forced to shop at the company-owned store where prices are rigged to keep you penniless. You aren't just selling your labor, you are selling your lifespan, piece by agonizing piece, to build the bridges and battleships of an empire that doesn't even know your name. But as the clock ticks toward the 12-hour mark and your muscles scream for a reprieve, you realize something chilling. All of this, the heat, the dust, The back-breaking wait is the predictable part of the job. It's what you signed up for. But then the floor begins to vibrate with a frequency you've never felt before. The veteran workers, men who have survived 20 years in this hell, suddenly drop their tools. Their faces, usually masks of stoic exhaustion, turn a ghostly shade of pale. You realize that the greatest danger in the Victorian steel mill isn't the fire you can see. It's the invisible pressure building beneath your feet that's about to turn this factory into a massive, jagged bomb. It's not an earthquake. It's the steam boilers. These massive iron beasts are the heart of the mill, but in 1850, they are ticking time bombs. Pressure gauges are primitive, and safety valves are often intentionally pinned down by foremen to squeeze out more power. When a boiler fails, it doesn't just leak, it detonates with the force of a modern artillery shell. The sound is a crack like a lightning strike inside your skull. Brick, iron, and glass become supersonic shrapnel. If you're lucky, the blast kills you instantly. If you're unlucky, you're caught in the cloud of superheated steam that follows. It doesn't just burn you, it liquefies the soft tissue of your throat and lungs before you can even scream. But here is the most chilling part. The mill doesn't close for a funeral. While the remains of your coworkers are being shoveled into pine boxes, the governor is already shouting for the next man in line. Human life is a renewable resource. The machinery is not. You're back at your station within the hour because the quota doesn't care about blood on the floor. But as you wipe the soot and sweat from your eyes, you realize the boilers were just the warm-up. The real monster is sitting in the center of the room, glowing with a light so bright it looks like a fallen star. This is the Bessemer converter. Imagine a 30-foot tall iron pear pivoting on massive gears, roaring like a jet engine. This machine is the miracle of the age, turning brittle iron into flexible steel in 20 minutes. But to stay on schedule, you have to stand on a narrow, slick gantry just feet away from its mouth. When the converter tips to pour, it releases a cascade of slag, molten waste that hits the floor and explodes into a billion tiny white-hot needles. One slip, one dizzy spell from the heat, and you don't just get burned, you disappear. There are stories whispered in the pubs of Sheffield about the ghost steel. It's the legend of the worker who fell directly into a 20-ton ladle of molten metal. There was no body to recover. The steel was simply poured into the molds, and somewhere in the British Empire, there is a bridge or a railway line that contains the literal carbon of a human being. You survive the pour, but the air is changing. A thick, sweet smell begins to fill the floor, masking the scent of sulfur. The veteran workers start covering their mouths with damp rags. This is the silent killer, carbon monoxide. In the poorly ventilated sheds, the gas pools in the low spots, invisible and odorless. You won't feel pain. You'll just feel tired. Your knees will buckle, and you'll lay down for a nap on the vibrating floor, never to wake up. If you manage to stay conscious, you still have to contend with the little nippers. These are the children, some as young as 8, darting between the massive, unguarded flywheels to clear jams or lubricate the gears. They are fast, but the machines are faster. A caught sleeve or a loose hair means a lost limb in a fraction of a second. There is no workers' comp. There is no surgery. If a boy loses an arm, he's simply let go, left to beg on the streets of the abyss with a stump that will likely turn gangrenous by the end of the week. The sun finally sets, but the mill stays as bright as high noon. You've hit the 14-hour mark. Your coordination is gone. Your steel mill stare, that blank, 1,000-yard gaze of the terminally exhausted, is fixed on the crucible. This is when the most gruesome accidents happen. Tired men make mistakes with heavy tools. A dropped tong, a missed signal, and a 60-pound pot of liquid fire shatters at your feet. You survive the shift. You step out of the fortress of fire and back into the freezing, soot-choked night of Sheffield. Your lungs burn with every gasp of the clean air, which is still thick enough to turn a white shirt black in minutes. You're heading home, but the nightmare isn't over. You have to walk through the rookeries, slums so dense and violent that the local constabulary won't even enter after dark. You're carrying your pittance of a wage, but you aren't the only one who's hungry. In the shadows of the tenements, the garrotters are waiting. Thieves who use wire or cord to strangle workers from behind for the sake of a few copper coins. But as you dodge a group of shadows in an alleyway, you realize something even more terrifying. The real threat to your life tonight isn't a thief with a wire. It's the very thing you're about to do to survive the night. You're heading toward a lodging house where you'll pay a penny to sleep standing up, leaning over a rope with 20 other men. And in that cramped, steaming room, an invisible passenger is waiting to hitch a ride in your blood. The invisible passenger waiting for you in the shadows of that cheap lodging house isn't a person, but the pale death of cholera and typhoid. You pay a penny to lean against a rope stretched across the stifling room, sleeping standing up next to dozens of other exhausted bodies. That rope is the only boundary keeping you from collapsing onto the garbage-strewn floor, but it cannot stop the pathogens creeping through every breath, heavy with sweat and foul air. This is the final, quiet note in the symphony of damnation. Even after leaving the furnace, you aren't even allowed to lie down like a proper human being. We have been searching for the answer to the most terrifying truth of this era. It isn't found in the 3,000-degree river of molten steel, nor is it in the boiler explosions tearing through the night. The true horror is the absolute invisibility of the human condition. You look at the majestic bridges spanning the Thames, the proud ironclad ships of the Royal Navy, or the railways connecting continents, and you see the greatness of the British Empire. But if you look long enough, deep enough into that gleaming steel, you will see the ghosts. The price of progress wasn't calculated in pounds sterling or solid gold, but in every millimeter of fibrotic lung tissue, in eyes blinded by ultraviolet light, and in the remains of children crushed under the gears of prosperity. The legend of the ghost steel isn't just a rumor in the pubs of Sheffield, it is a spiritual and material truth. The steel of the 19th century literally contains the carbon from the blood and flesh of the workers who fell into it. The modern world we inherit today wasn't just built on steel, it was forged with the souls of the people crushed in the abyss. That is the core answer to the horror we mentioned at the beginning. A system where the brilliance of civilization is directly proportional to the darkness of the lives that created it. You stand in Sheffield in 1850, your lungs full of iron dust, your hands covered in burn scars, and you know you are just a piece of expendable material. But it was that very grim sacrifice that laid the foundation for modern medicine, labor laws, and the comfort you are enjoying right now as you read these words. Stepping out of the shadows of the Sheffield steel mills, we carry not only a shudder at the brutality of the past, but also a profound awakening. A hard day's work in the 21st century is nothing compared to the second-by-second battle for survival inside those fortresses of fire. Those men and children sold their lifespans to buy the future for humanity. They have no monuments, no names in the history books, but the warmth of their final breaths still lingers in every steel structure surrounding us. We owe them not just sympathy, but recognition. The recognition that every step forward for humanity was paid for with immeasurable pain. When you see a steel structure reaching into the sky, remember the black smoke of Sheffield, the roar of the Bessemer converter, and the people who turned into steel so we could have today. The brilliant light of the modern world doesn't come from the sun. It comes from the blazing furnaces that incinerated an entire generation to light the way to the future. That is the final, bitter, but epic truth about how our world was truly forged. The modern world we inhabit isn't just constructed from glass, concrete, and cold metal. It is a sprawling, silent graveyard of stories that traditional history books often find too uncomfortable to tell. Every time you cross a bridge, board a train, or look up at a skyline that seems to touch the heavens, you are standing atop the crystallized endurance of millions who were never given a voice in their own time. Their sacrifices are the invisible mortar holding our reality together. We believe that the greatest tragedy isn't the suffering these people endured, but the possibility of them being forgotten, of their lives being reduced to mere statistics in a ledger of industrial output. We are dedicated to unearthing these buried narratives, peeling back the polished veneer of the present to confront the raw, often terrifying truth of how our civilization was actually forged. If you feel that history should be more than just a list of dates and kings, If you believe that honoring the ghosts in the steel is the only way to truly understand the value of the life we live today, then we invite you to walk this path with us. By choosing to follow this journey, you are refusing to let these stories vanish back into the soot of the past. You are becoming a witness to the hidden costs of human progress. There are still many more shadows to explore, and many more voices waiting to be rescued from the silence of the abyss. Let's keep digging through the ash together, so that the light of the present never loses sight of the fire that created it. Join us for the next descent.